How do you know which exercise to use when you have multiple exercises that appear to accomplish the same thing? Good morning. Happy Monday. I have Neural Coffee in hand, and it is perfect. All right, another solid week lies ahead, so this is going to be a fun one. Let's dig right into Monday's Q&A. This comes from Joseph. He says, "Hello, Bill." Hello, Joseph. "I'm wondering what drives exercise selection, particularly when it appears to me that there are multiple means to a solution. How do you decide which exercise you will program when tackling a goal based on table test selection? For instance, when creating a posterior concentric yielding strategy in the pelvis, Camporini Deadlift, front foot elevated split squat, backwards sled drag may all provide the desired outcome. How do you decide which exercise you'll program?" So this is actually a really, really good question, and it's not as simple as it seems sometimes. And I think that a lot of people are expecting some sort of cookbookish kind of an answer. People are really uncomfortable in the gray, and what we have to recognize is that we have to have this overarching strategy of some sort, and then we have to have the tactics that we apply. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to divide this into three things that are going to help us narrow the probabilities, because we're always playing with probabilities as to what will be successful and what may not. And so the three things that we're going to rely on are our model, our process, and then experience. And so from a model perspective, what we're actually talking about is some form of representation of what we perceive reality to be. And so when we're dealing with complexities such as human movement, there's no way that we can understand it all or see it all at any one time. And so what the model does is it provides us a simplification and gives us a starting point of initial conditions to work from. And so when I recognized and involved the archetypes, right? So I organized the structure of the archetypes the way I did, is because it immediately helped me reduce the probabilities of what was possible, because you start to recognize that structure determines what someone's movement capabilities will be or should be, and I've immediately cut quite a bit of the probability in my favor. And so this gives us our initial conditions to work from. Then we rely on our processes. And so what this would be is, okay, so now I understand that I have this representative model, and now I can go into my assessment. I can determine what it is that I'm actually seeing, and then what influences do I need. So let's just say that we have somebody that has this left posterior compressive strategy on the back of the pelvis, and it's pushing that sacral base forward and maybe over to the right. And so now what I know is that from my assessment process that I'm going to need that yielding strategy on this left side of the sacral base. And so there's any number of ways that I can get this. So you mentioned in your questions a few exercises. So let's just say that, okay, I want to use either the Camporini Deadlift or the front foot elevated split squat. Well, both of those are going to help me create that yielding strategy in the sacral base. So both of them appear to be on the table, but now we have to understand what the secondary consequences of each one of those are. And so if I'm using a Camporini Deadlift or I'm using a front foot elevated split squat, while I can certainly achieve that yielding position at the left sacral base, as I move out of those two exercises, I have to create a concentric overcoming strategy, which may actually reinforce the reasoning behind why this position existed in the first place. And if I can't manage that strategy, then all I'm doing is actually reinforcing what the limitation is. And so those are the secondary consequences that are associated with that type of an exercise. So let's just say that I can actually create an unloaded situation. So if I used a staggered stance or a side split squat with a cable chop, I'm actually moving into the same orientation of the pelvis where I'm capturing that yielding position, but now I'm doing it in a much more reduced load environment where I'm using the cable pull down to actually reduce gravity in my favor. So now I can actually capture the change and actually reduce the amount of concentric strategy that I'm gonna have to use to get out of that Now, let's just say that I have this additive in regards to my pelvic strategy, that I've got this posterior lower compression. And so I immediately eliminate a few things, which would be the Camporini deadlift and the front foot elevated split squat, because that posterior lower compression is going to be interference. So I may have to actually resolve that first. So now I'm thinking about a strategy where I might use like a heels elevated toe touch, which is going to move me way back to that earlier propulsive strategy to help me reduce some of that posterior lower concentric activity. In my world, where I'm dealing with a lot of pain, and people tell me that, oh, I have pain or discomfort in a standing activity, that immediately tells me that, okay, I need to move you into a position where I have to reduce this gravity. So I might end up using something like a hook lying activity under these circumstances to reduce that posterior lower strategy, knowing full well that if I stood them up, I have pain as interference, I have concentric muscle activity as interference. In the non-painful world, what you're going to want to try to do is strategize them into the highest level of performance where they can still be successful. So let's just say that I've worked somebody through multiple phases of interventions. I've reacquired the ability to stand effectively, and now I want to reintroduce a concentric strategy in that left posterior hip, but I need them to be able to control and manage it. Under those circumstances, now maybe I start to introduce this with the backwards sled drag. So what the backwards sled drag allows me to do, it allows me to grade the load on that concentric strategy, but as I move into the yielding strategy is entirely unloaded as I step backwards into that yielding strategy. So that might be a better way for me to start to reintroduce that. So as you can see, all of these activities can support the goal of acquiring the yielding strategy, but there is nuances associated with each one of those depending on what my findings are. And so that's why the representative model becomes so important. That's why following a process becomes so important. But ultimately, it's the investment in the repetitions. And when I say repetitions, I'm talking about experience here, for you to gain the knowledge, so you understand the nuances of your interventions, so you understand the subtleties of the presentations that your patients or clients bring to you, and then you can understand the secondary consequences. So let's mix this down to just some simple rules. I have to understand what my starting conditions are and the representation that my client is bringing to me. So that is my archetypes. I have to recognize the strategy that they're presenting, and I also need to understand the strategy that I'm going to utilize to try to intervene to make the changes that are desired. And so that requires that I understand the nuances of the presentations, the nuances of the interventions that I'm going to be utilizing. So I need to understand where I would have secondary consequences that might actually be interference. Then it just comes down to my experimentation, where I intervene, I observe what that outcome is, and then I intervene again. And so this is my repeated process until goals are achieved. So Joseph, I hope that's helpful for you. If I'm unclear, or if you have other questions, go to askbillhartman@gmail.com, askbillhartman@gmail.com, and ask more questions. Everybody have an outstanding Monday, and I will see you tomorrow.